So we're doing competition, and you know our names already. So
Andrew Carnegie, a famous philanthropist in the 19th century who expanded the American steel industry, says, "And while the law of competition may be sometimes hard for the individual, it is best for the race because it ensures the survival of the fittest in every department." This is the exact concept we see between the West and the East, as the West was composed of the smaller countries which were in competition all the time, as opposed to the East, which was relatively peaceful.
as Joseph said, the East was relatively peaceful because they didn't really have much competition due to their geography. As you can see, Europe had geographically was split up into many nations, while China was just one big country, which meant that there were not a lot of other countries to compete against them. But though China was stagnant, as they say, and they didn't have much competition, they did invent a lot of things, such as gunpowder, printers, and paper, items that we use today. And because China was more advanced, it showed the hurdle that the Europeans had to achieve in order to overtake the East.
In the late 1400s, Europe was split up into about 1,000 independent polities by rivers, mountain ranges, marshes, and other geographical features. In 1497, Vasco da Gama set sail from Portugal here to find a new spice route in Portugal. The current route went up this way, but was tightly controlled by the Armenians and the Turks. Vasco da Gama tried to find a new route that went past the Cape of Good Hope and up through the Indian Ocean. If they could succeed at doing this before the Spanish did, they would be able to control the spice trade. Luckily for the Portuguese, they did actually succeed, but Spain obviously, Spain colonized a lot of Latin America before Portugal and stuff. But that's just one example of the competition between Spain and Portugal. There was competition between almost all the polities in Europe over here. There were, for example, because of countries' constant state of warfare, they were forced to have arms races, essentially, like literal arms races, technological arms races, political arms races, as well as economic arms races. These incessant arms races made for massive growth in all of these areas. That is what finally ended up giving Europe the lead over China. Furthermore, competition existed not only between separate polities, but also within polities. There would be competition between neighboring cities or towns, and even competition within the cities in the form of guilds.
Okay, so as I said before, China was a stagnant but advanced country. And to prove that, in 1806, the Chinese engineer Su Song added one gear escapement to the water clock, which made the world's first mechanical clock. To put that in perspective, the English didn't have a clock as near accurate as the mechanical clock that he made until a century later. And another example is the sea drill, which many assume that Jethro Tull invented in 1701. But instead, it was invented by the Chinese 2,000 years before. 50 years even before Columbus set sail to find the Americas, the Chinese led 6 expeditions by Admiral Zheng He in the years 1405 to 1424. The Chinese ships were much more sophisticated and advanced, and they were obviously much bigger, as you can see, the Chinese jumbo compared to Columbus's ship. And they visited many places from countries such as Jeddah all the way to Africa. They brought back many interesting things that weren't in China, such as a giraffe, which the Chinese emperor said it was the magical unicorn from the legends. Because China didn't really have competition, they didn't really think about colonizing the places they went. Unlike Europe, which basically if you colonize, you got an advantage over the other people because you might have a resource that some other country wouldn't have. And lastly, China had a more efficient and sophisticated agricultural method. The method in China was 20 times more efficient than that of medieval Europe. To put that in perspective, 1 acre of land could support one family in China. But for Europe, we needed 20 acres of land to support one family.
Further expanding on Ziyi's idea, we can see that China was far more advanced than Europe through the rivers, specifically the Thames and the Yangtze. The Yangtze was geographically much wider and longer. It was around 4,000 miles as opposed to the Thames, which was 200 miles. And also, if you look at this map, there's this canal, it's called the Grand Canal, that goes up from Nanjing, right here, to Beijing. This would have connected the two most biggest cities in the world at the time. Another thing is, during the reign of Ming Emperor Yongle, from 1402 to 1424, he built various things like the Forbidden City and the Precious Belt Bridge. The Precious Belt Bridge would have been far more advanced compared to the London Bridge at the time. The London Bridge would have looked like stilts to the Chinese. And another thing is Nanjing. It had in 1420 it had from 500,000 to 1 million citizens, as opposed to Europe, where in 1349, because of the Black Plague, it only had around 40,000, which was like less than 1/10 of Nanjing's population. A big player in that was the Black Death, of course, but then the reason the Chinese didn't kind of die off because of this plague was because they had a hygienic control, specifically the sewage system. The sewage system would have carried the human excrements into the paddy field, and it would have been used as fertilizers. While in London, it would have been just thrown out into the streets, and it would have carried bacteria and viruses. However, Ferguson argues that this would have gave Europe a GDP boost because less people means higher GDP per capita. And this kind of shows why Marco Polo would have been kind of considered like a lunatic when he came back to Europe after his trip in the 1200s, because China was so much more advanced with their forbidden cities and water system. They had a canal, and they had the Precious Belt Bridge.
Alright, so as Ziyi, Joesph, and Arya said, the Chinese empire used to be atop the world. They used to be really powerful. However, over time, due to lack of competition and self-isolation, they started to fall behind. This is shown in 1644, where rebel leader Li Zicheng attacked Beijing and took over. This would lead to the suicide of the final Ming emperor and start the overall decline of the Chinese empire. Another point on how the Eastern Empire was falling behind was how, in the late 18th century, the English farmers died because of 28% animal products, while comparable Japanese farmer would only have 2% animal products and 90% cereals, mostly rice. So it would show how Europe agriculture was doing really well as they were able to produce more meat for their people. And lastly, in June of 1842, the British Royal Navy sailed up the Yangtze River into the Grand Canal. They did this because a Chinese official had destroyed most of their opium stocks. This would lead to the Opium War, where the British would absolutely decimate the Chinese army, as you see here, and would lead to Chinese giving the British 21 million silver dollars, open up 5 ports for British trade, and cede the island of Hong Kong. These 3 points show how over time Eastern empires started falling behind their Western counterparts.
By the 1900s, it was easy to see that China had lost its race for world dominance. The word Western is used often to mean modern, whereas while Europe was in the Dark Ages, it was China that was more advanced. Europe's competition and incessant arms races allowed them to develop in the technological, political, and economic spheres, while China was content to stagnate, sure of its own natural superiority. They refused to allow new ideas and technologies in or out because they were certain that they were superior. This lasted until World War II. The Western dominance lasted until World War II, when the Japanese finally destroyed the British Empire for good. And now the balance of power is shifting towards the center. It's hard to say today that it is truly the West that is better. And here we are in Singapore, in the Eastern Hemisphere, like a 5-hour flight from China, and we're in this, like at least 20 laptops I can see, right? Lastly, the Chinese Empire lost to the British in the Opium War, which caused them to finally give up on dominating the world, while they could have. And what Ziyi was talking about, the admiral with his ships, using those ships, if they wanted to, China could have easily colonized much faster than the West did. They could have taken the lead for good, but when the emperor died, his successor canceled all the voyages and made it get this, they made it illegal to own or to go to sea in a ship like that. That's like the U.S. today saying it is illegal to use a drone against the United States enemies. That it's completely counterintuitive and destroyed their military plans. Thank you. Are you an activity, guys? You have an activity, guys.
Yeah.
Alright.
Okay. So basically, we're gonna put 2 piles of pencils when they're in here, and the activity is just grab as many pencils as you can, and at the end, people, as I said, has less than 5 pencils gets punished by the.
If you have more than 5, you get to decide.
And the person that gets the most pencils gets a prize.
You hit them around the room.
Are they like where are
One's
they?
there, one's there.
Yeah, no, here and there.
Okay, go. Oh!
Got
Go.
Wait, I don't see a pencil.
I'm so confused.
What
I don't want to
pencil
get
is
punished. Go.
Oh my
That's a
god.
lot of pencils.
But they're
I'm just gonna.
Oh, you can open it.
Fight.
Oh, she has a broken hand, guys. I have a broken hand. Okay. Okay, then.
No.
It's not broken.
It's not working. I'm not together.
Hey, look, a pencil. Okay, I actually don't want to like.
Guys, stop. Apparently Ziyi was stupid and he never opened the box before he threw it.
Oh, yeah.
Ziyi, you're a genius.
Maybe reach
We got it. Ziyi was supposed to.
Okay, we can
Stop. Use the back. Ziyi was supposed to open the box. That was good. Stop. Just kidding. You're gonna stab someone. Good luck.
Stop!
Here we have your.
This is Danny.
Go away. Nine, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3.
You took all of my pencils.
How many pencils do you guys have?
Right here.
Who actually has 5?
No, I have 5.
Wait, you have 5?
Yeah,
Who has
8.
5? You have 1 5.
Ow.
You have 10. Well, let's see.
I did.
No, I didn't. How many do you have?
5. I have 2.
You get
Stop
the
on me.
So,
Fair.
3 of you had more than 5. You gotta get to decide how to punish the rest
Yeah,
of
how
the
to
class.
punish everyone. Like,
Good shot.
Why is my punish shot?
You were to
You already
punish all of
punished
them.
me. Stabbed me with a pencil.
Did
Daddy stole mine, so I
Give him a hand, folks.